UFC Fight Night, Robert Whittaker versus Reinier de Ridder, is a highly anticipated main event happening very soon, and it looks like this is going to be the best Fight Night card of the entire year so far. There are so many great matchups on this card, and of course, the biggest matchup with the most spotlight is going to be the main event between Robert Whittaker versus Reinier de Ridder. And I've been analyzing this matchup ever since it's been announced by the UFC. The more I think about it, Robert Whittaker needs to win this fight. And not like in a way that every fighter needs to win their fights. I'm talking like this might be one of the most pivotal fights in Robert Whittaker's career. Robert Whittaker, he was the former middleweight champ and he ended up losing his belt to Israel Adesanya. And Robert Whittaker ruled the middleweight division alongside Israel Adesanya for almost 3 years. He became like the gatekeeper for the middleweight title. He gained wins against multiple top middleweight contenders at the time, like Darren Till, Jared Cannonier, Kelvin Gastelum, and Marvin Vettori. And he arguably beat Israel Adesanya in their second fight. I rewatched that fight recently, and I think that Robert Whittaker won 3 rounds of that fight, and he deserved to get that win. Unfortunately, in the summer of 2023, his reign alongside Israel Adesanya came to an end when he faced Dricus du Plessis, who many people massively underestimated, and even though Robert Whittaker lost against Dricus, it wasn't that bad. Dricus, he went on to become a dominant middleweight champion, and Robert Whittaker only shifted down to number 2 in the middleweight division at the time. Whittaker then went on an impressive 2-fight win streak against Paulo Costa and Ikram Aliskerov on short notice. However, at UFC 308, that's when things took a bad turn for Robert Whittaker. In his most recent fight against Khamzat Chimaev, his teeth gave out when Khamzat put him in a face crank, and this was a very scary injury, and I don't think that YouTube will let me show a visual of the injury on screen. It was a very gnarly injury to see the aftermath of, and when you consider that Robert Whittaker is going to be facing Reinier de Ridder for his next matchup, that injury is actually really concerning. Since Reinier de Ridder, he's a jiu-jitsu ace, and he's finished people using the rear naked choke just like Khamzat Chimaev did to Robert Whittaker. So if you guys haven't noticed, I think Reinier de Ridder is going to be an extremely tough matchup for Robert Whittaker. And like I said, Robert Whittaker, he needs to win this fight to keep his career afloat right now. But I want to add that I don't think that this is an impossible matchup for Robert Whittaker. When this fight was like first announced, I thought the UFC was throwing Robert Whittaker to the wolves. But after thinking about the actual stylistic clash, I think Robert Whittaker has the tools necessary to defeat Reinier de Ridder. And in this video, we're going to be analyzing the stylistic clash on this matchup and seeing if it's possible for Robert Whittaker to win this fight, or if Reinier de Ridder has the answers to everything that Robert Whittaker has in his tool bag. And it's important to note that right now, Robert Whittaker is the favorite to win this fight in the betting odds. So the odd makers think that Robert Whittaker has a slightly better chance to win this fight, and Reinier de Ridder is the underdog. But let's not forget that Reinier de Ridder, he was a very heavy underdog against Bo Nickel, and he absolutely destroyed him. So you can't really just look at the odds. But getting into the actual matchup, I think there are 3 battles between their styles that I think whoever wins these will determine the winner of the fight entirely. The first style clash that I want to bring to the forefront in this matchup is going to be the grappling-centric pressure of Reinier de Ridder versus the anti-wrestling footwork of Robert Whittaker. I believe that not only is Reinier de Ridder's takedowns and grappling going to be an issue in this fight, it's going to be the pressure of the grappling that is going to play a key role in this fight. Because Reinier de Ridder, he thrives on smothering his opponents early, initiating clinches, and getting to body locks off any openings. He has really good judo to mix with his Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There's a really good synergy in those two martial art styles that I think that Reinier de Ridder, he mixes really well. And when you compare this to Robert Whittaker's like elite footwork, his blitz entries, and his defensive wrestling, which he has really good reflexes on when he's initiating his sprawls, but you have to note that Robert Whittaker, he isn't really that good of grappling when he's off bottom. We don't really see him on bottom and having that much success. But you also have to consider that Reinier de Ridder, he doesn't shoot from distance like a normal wrestler. Like I mentioned before, Reinier de Ridder's wrestling game is really weak compared to his jiu-jitsu. So instead of using like explosive double legs, he uses more body locks and trips from the clinch, which kind of nullifies Robert Whittaker's strong defensive sprawl he uses on traditional wrestlers, because that sprawl won't be needed if Reinier de Ridder is initiating his takedowns from the clinch, from body locks, and from throws. So that's going to force Robert Whittaker into grappling exchanges that he's not used to defending. And body locks and trips from the clinch really relies on that strength and physicality, something that Robert Whittaker has a disadvantage going into this matchup, and he has struggled with against previous opponents. That physicality advantage was a huge factor in his last performance against Khamzat Chimaev. And like I mentioned in a previous video, that physicality disadvantage was a factor he struggled against when he fought Dricus du Plessis. There was a moment when he fought Dricus that Dricus kind of just muscled Robert Whittaker to the ground using a body lock and a trip. And I think that would be like a perfect takedown for Reinier de Ridder to replicate and get Robert Whittaker on the ground that way. But anyways, the second battle that I think is going to be crucial is going to be the grappling transitions versus the scrambling of Robert Whittaker. How is Reinier de Ridder going to control Robert Whittaker when he has such a good get-up game? And Robert Whittaker, he doesn't really dabble in jiu-jitsu off of his back. He has really good scrambles. He tries to avoid that position as much as possible. He's very urgent getting back to his feet. And that's going to be a really good mindset to have when you're fighting Reinier de Ridder. Because honestly, the worst position to be in when you're fighting Reinier de Ridder is to get taken down in the middle of the cage and be working off your back. Reinier de Ridder, he doesn't rush and he doesn't give up positions to try and go for submissions while he's grappling. And that slower, controlled pace that he grapples with, it really smothers his opponents, especially when he's so huge for the middleweight division. But the thing about it, Robert Whittaker's get-up game, it worked against fighters like Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori, even fighters like Yoel Romero, who are more explosive than Reinier de Ridder. But the thing about Reinier de Ridder, he's very sticky when he's working off a top position in the grappling. He doesn't give you space. And if Robert Whittaker gives his back to try and stand, Reinier de Ridder, he could easily wrap up a rear naked choke like he's done to countless opponents. I think that this battle really depends on if Robert Whittaker is still explosive. He's been through a lot of wars in his career. I wouldn't call him exactly old, but his body has a lot of wear and tear on it, and he's accumulated a lot of injuries throughout his career as well. My third battle that I think is going to be a huge determining factor of who wins this matchup, and I think this is probably the biggest battle that is going to be happening when these two styles clash, is going to be the volume striking of Robert Whittaker versus the takedown pressure of Reinier de Ridder. How is Robert Whittaker going to deal with the threat of the takedown? Because Robert Whittaker, he needs rhythm to land that 1-2, his feints and his blitz attacks. And against a guy like Reinier de Ridder, any forward blitzes risk a clash into a level change by Reinier de Ridder. I mentioned that in my previous video about this matchup. When Robert Whittaker blitzes in, that's going to be a time for Reinier de Ridder to initiate that clinch, to initiate the body lock, to initiate the throws from the clinch position. So it's like Robert Whittaker is actively putting himself in that range to give Reinier de Ridder an advantage in the grappling. Because like I said, Reinier de Ridder, he's not a aggressive wrestler. He's not going to actively shoot double legs from distance like a Khamzat Chimaev. He's more waiting for that clinch where he can get off a trip or a body lock, something like that. And honestly, in my opinion, Reinier de Ridder, he doesn't even need to strike to win this fight. He just needs to use that threat of the takedown to cause Robert Whittaker to hesitate and not open up in his striking. Because Robert Whittaker is the best striker that Reinier de Ridder has ever faced, probably in his whole career. And another factor I want to mention is that I'm kind of worried, since Reinier de Ridder is coming off of that huge KO win against Bo Nickel, he might try and hang with Robert Whittaker in the striking. I think if Reinier de Ridder thinks he can strike with Robert Whittaker, that will be a huge mistake. and I can even see him getting knocked out because his striking defense is a bit questionable at some times. There are numerous examples of him like taking huge shots on the chin to land his own shots. Even in the Bo Nickel matchup, I mentioned that before, that to land that knee that finished the fight, he took a huge left overhand by Bo Nickel straight to his chin, but he just walked through it. And when you're fighting someone like Robert Whittaker, he actually has some power in his hands when he lands clean. We saw what he did to Ikram Aliskerov. He knocked him out cold, and he can do the same thing if he lands clean on a fighter that doesn't have that good of a striking defense base like a Reinier de Ridder. So to win this fight, Reinier de Ridder, he needs to stick to the grappling and mix it up. He only needs to strike enough to make Robert Whittaker hesitate, and then he needs to shoot to get back that threat of the takedown. I think that'll disrupt Robert Whittaker's game entirely, and if Robert Whittaker is forced to hold back on his output, that's basically going to be the end of the entire fight because, like I said, this is a grappler versus a striker matchup. So if the striker doesn't strike, he doesn't have any offense to work off. He doesn't have any offense for the judges to score as well. So after analyzing this fight, I think that I'm going to give the edge to Reinier de Ridder to win this matchup. Like I said, this is a very close fight, and in my opinion, it turns out to be way closer than I thought when this fight was initially made. But the sad thing about this matchup, if Robert Whittaker loses this fight, it will prove that the middleweight division is like evolving right in front of fighters from that previous era, like Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya. And the sad part that a lot of people don't want to come to terms with is that Robert Whittaker and other fighters from this era are not washed. Robert Whittaker is only like 34. Reinier de Ridder is older than him. So the sad part is that if Robert Whittaker loses this fight, it'll probably confirm that his skills and his abilities and the skills and abilities of other fighters from Robert Whittaker's era are slowly becoming more obsolete as more complete and difficult contenders make their way up the middleweight rankings.